Before sunrise, while most of America was still asleep, a stranger walked quietly toward the back door. He carried a metal basket filled with glass bottles. The bottles touched with a soft clink in the darkness. He did not knock. He did not need anyone to sign for the delivery. At some homes, the door was left unlocked so he could place the milk directly inside the kitchen. Then he disappeared before breakfast. By the 1940s and 1950s, this scene was repeated across thousands of American neighborhoods. The milkman knew which families needed 2 bottles, which children drank extra cream, and which customers could not always pay on time. He was not a relative. He was not exactly a friend. Yet families trusted him enough to approach their homes before dawn. That trust seems ordinary, until you learn what milk had once been. Only a few generations earlier, city milk could be watered down, contaminated, or collected from sick animals. It spoiled quickly, carried dangerous bacteria, and was especially deadly to young children. So how did one of the most feared foods in the city become a symbol of health and safety? And why did the man who made that transformation possible eventually vanish from nearly every street? To understand the milkman, we must return to a time before sealed bottles, electric refrigerators, and safe milk. Before sealed bottles and refrigerated trucks, buying milk was a very different experience. In many towns, families purchased it directly from a farmer or a street vendor. The seller arrived with a large metal can. The customer brought a jug, bowl, or pail from home. Then, the milk was simply poured from one container into another. There was no printed expiration date, no protective seal, and often no reliable way to know where the milk had come from. For people living near farms, fresh milk could be collected soon after the cow was milked. But as cities expanded during the 19th century, more families lived miles away from the animals producing their food. That distance created a dangerous race against time. Milk begins changing almost immediately after it leaves the cow. Without reliable cooling, bacteria multiply quickly, especially during the summer. A container that seemed fresh in the morning could smell sour by evening. Families tried everything they could. Some lowered milk into wells. Others stored it in cool cellars or beside windows during winter. Wealthier households used ice boxes filled with blocks of harvested ice. But these methods were inconsistent, and the longer milk remained unrefrigerated, the greater the risk. This created an opportunity for a new kind of worker. At first, farmers or local dairies began delivering milk by cart. Horses pulled heavy metal cans through crowded streets, while vendors stopped outside homes and measured out each family's order. Speed mattered. The earlier the milk arrived, the more likely it was to remain drinkable. The milkman was born, not from luxury, but from necessity. He connected the countryside to the growing city, carrying one of the most fragile foods people consumed. Yet, fast delivery could not guarantee safe milk. Because even when it arrived on time, no one could be certain what had been added to it, or what invisible dangers were already inside. By the middle of the 19th century, milk had become essential to city life. Doctors recommended it for children. Parents believed it would make them stronger. But in the crowded neighborhoods of industrial America, the milk inside a family's pitcher could be very different from the milk that had left the cow. Some of it came from animals kept beside urban distilleries. These cows were often fed the hot, watery grain waste left over from alcohol production. Confined in filthy sheds and weakened by poor diets, they produced a thin, low-quality liquid that became known as swill milk. It looked pale, it smelled unpleasant, and merchants knew customers would reject it. So they changed its appearance. Milk could be diluted with water to increase the amount available for sale. Flour, starch, Chalk or other substances might then be added to make it look thicker and whiter. Sweeteners helped hide sourness, while coloring could imitate the rich tone of fresh cream. To the buyer, the result still looked like milk. That was the terrifying part. A mother standing beside a street cart could examine the liquid, smell it, and still have no reliable way to know whether it was safe. The greatest dangers were invisible. Milk from infected animals, contaminated containers, dirty water, or careless handling could carry tuberculosis, typhoid fever, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and other illnesses. Children were especially vulnerable. Many depended on milk for daily nutrition, yet their bodies were less able to survive the infections it sometimes carried. During hot summers, when milk spoiled even faster, sickness spread through poor neighborhoods with devastating speed. The milkman was not always responsible. He was often only the final person in a long chain that began with the cow and passed through farmers, dealers, storage rooms, wagons, and street vendors. But to frightened families, he was the face of the entire system. Public outrage grew. Doctors traced outbreaks back to contaminated supplies. Journalists described sick cows and filthy dairies. Reformers demanded inspections, stricter standards, and punishment for merchants who diluted or disguised their products. Milk was no longer viewed as an ordinary food. It had become a public health emergency. Yet cities could not simply stop drinking it. Families needed milk, especially for children. The challenge was to make people trust it again. That required more than honest vendors. Milk needed to be protected from the moment it left the dairy until the moment it reached the kitchen. The solution would come from two ideas working together: heat that could destroy invisible pathogens, and a sealed glass bottle that made tampering far more difficult. The solution looked surprisingly ordinary: a clear glass bottle. Before bottled milk, families bought an anonymous white liquid from an open metal can. Once it was poured into a household pitcher, there was little evidence of where it had come from or what had happened to it along the way. The glass bottle changed that relationship. For the first time, milk could arrive in a container associated with a specific dairy. The company's name might be embossed directly into the glass, making the producer visible and accountable. Customers could inspect the milk before opening it. They could see whether the bottle was full, whether dirt had entered, and whether a layer of cream had risen to the top. Most importantly, a sealed cap made it far more difficult for someone to dilute the milk after it left the dairy. But the bottle alone could not destroy the organisms already inside. That required heat. The process became known as pasteurization, named after French scientist Louis Pasteur. By warming milk to a controlled temperature and then cooling it rapidly, dairies could kill many dangerous pathogens without boiling the product. The idea sounds simple today. At the time, it was controversial. Some consumers believed heating milk damaged its natural qualities. Some farmers resisted the cost of new equipment. Others argued that pasteurization might allow careless dairies to hide poor sanitation. But public health officials saw something different. They saw a method that could prevent disease on a massive scale. Gradually, cities introduced stricter inspections, sanitation rules, cooling requirements, and standards for pasteurized milk. The dairy industry was no longer expected merely to produce milk. It had to control the entire journey. The cow had to be healthy. The equipment had to be cleaned. The milk had to be cooled. The bottle had to be washed and sealed. And the finished product had to reach the customer before it warmed again. That made the milkman far more than a neighborhood delivery driver. He became the final link in a new public health system. Every morning, he collected empty bottles from the doorstep and replaced them with sealed ones. The empties returned to the dairy, where they were washed, sterilized, refilled, and sent out again. One bottle might complete that cycle dozens of times. And with every delivery, trust slowly replaced fear. A bottle on the doorstep now carried a silent promise. This milk had a known source. It had been protected. Someone had inspected it. And the same familiar man had carried it safely through the final mile. The milkman had helped turn one of the city's most dangerous foods into a symbol of health. Now that families trusted what he delivered, they wanted more of it than ever. And the quiet figure arriving before sunrise was about to enter his golden age. By the early 20th century, the milkman had become one of the most familiar figures in American daily life. His day began long before sunrise. At the dairy, glass bottles were washed, filled, capped, and arranged in metal crates. Whole milk, cream, buttermilk, and sometimes butter, eggs, or cottage cheese were loaded onto a wagon or delivery truck. Then the route began. Through dark streets, the milkman moved from house to house while families slept. He knew every stop. 1 bottle for the elderly couple on the corner, 3 for the house with young children, extra cream for the family that always ordered on Fridays. Customers often left handwritten notes inside empty bottles or beneath the lid of an insulated milk box. 2 quarts tomorrow. No delivery until Monday. Please leave eggs. The milkman collected the empty glass containers and replaced them with full ones, creating a quiet cycle that repeated every morning. And the bottles had their own small mysteries. Before homogenization became common, cream naturally rose to the top. Children sometimes rushed to the door first, hoping to claim the thick layer before anyone mixed it into the milk. In cold weather, another surprise appeared. If the milk froze, it expanded upward, lifting the paper cap and pushing a column of frozen cream above the bottle's neck. Even the delivery animals became part of the system. On horse-drawn routes, some horses learned every stop so well that they moved forward on their own while the milkman ran between houses. The wagon advanced a few yards, paused, and waited for him to catch up. Later, quiet electric vehicles and small trucks replaced many of the horses, but the rhythm remained the same. Stop, carry, collect, replace, move on. The work was physically demanding. A crate filled with glass bottles was heavy. 1 broken bottle meant lost product, sharp glass, and a delay on a route that had to be completed before the day became warm. Rain did not cancel delivery. Neither did snow. The milkman worked while sidewalks were icy, streets were flooded, and most customers remained comfortably indoors. Yet his importance extended beyond the product he carried. He became part of the neighborhood. He noticed when newspapers piled up outside a house. He knew when a family had a new baby. He sometimes extended credit to customers who could not pay until the end of the week. For isolated people, he might be the first human voice they heard that day. By the 1940s and 1950s, home delivery seemed perfectly suited to modern family life. Refrigerators allowed households to keep milk fresh longer. Growing suburbs created thousands of new doorsteps. Children drank more milk, and advertising presented it as essential for strong bodies and healthy families. The milkman appeared to have a permanent place in America. But the same modern conveniences that made his deliveries more useful were quietly preparing to make them unnecessary. And the man trusted enough to approach the back door before dawn was about to become one of America's most famous cultural jokes. The milkman occupied a strange place in American life. He was not family, he was not a close friend, yet he was trusted in ways that would seem unusual today. Every morning, he approached the house while everyone inside was still asleep. He stepped onto the porch, walked around to the back door, and, in some homes, entered the kitchen to place fresh bottles directly inside. No appointment, no security camera, sometimes not even a locked door. That trust had been built through repetition. The same man arrived at nearly the same time, followed the same route, and remembered the habits of every household. He knew which family had a new baby and needed extra milk, which elderly customer wanted only one bottle, which home preferred cream on Saturdays, and which family might need another week before paying its bill. But this familiarity came at a physical cost. A milkman's workday often began in the middle of the night. He carried heavy crates filled with glass, climbed endless steps, crossed icy sidewalks, and worked through rain, wind, and summer heat. Each bottle had to arrive cold. Each order had to be correct. Each empty container had to return safely to the dairy. One mistake could delay the entire route. And because he appeared so regularly near the private spaces of family life, the milkman became something more than a worker. He became a character. Comedians, cartoons, and popular jokes began portraying him as the mysterious visitor who arrived while husbands were away at work. The phrase, "the milkman's child," became a teasing explanation whenever a child looked suspiciously unlike the father. Most of these jokes had little to do with reality, but they revealed something important. The milkman had become so familiar, so present inside the domestic world, that audiences immediately understood the joke. Almost no other delivery worker had that level of access. He was America's most trusted stranger, and at the height of his popularity, it seemed as though he would remain part of neighborhood life forever. But beyond the doorstep, the country was changing. Supermarkets were growing larger. Families were buying more cars. Refrigerators were becoming standard, and new containers could keep milk fresh without heavy returnable glass. One invention had not doomed the milkman. An entire modern lifestyle was about to do it. The milkman was not defeated by one invention. He was defeated by an entire way of life. At first, modern technology seemed to strengthen his business. Electric refrigerators allowed families to keep delivered milk cold for longer. Better roads helped dairies reach growing suburbs. Motorized trucks carried more bottles than horse-drawn wagons ever could. But each improvement also weakened the reason home delivery had existed in the first place. The refrigerator changed everything. Families no longer needed fresh milk brought to the door every morning. They could buy several days' worth at once and store it safely in the kitchen. Then came the automobile. Before widespread car ownership, carrying heavy bottles home from a distant store was inconvenient. But once families could drive, milk became just another item collected during a larger shopping trip. And those shopping trips were changing too. Small neighborhood stores gave way to supermarkets. Under one roof, customers could purchase meat, bread, vegetables, cleaning products, and milk. Instead of paying separately for daily delivery, a family could fill an entire cart in less than an hour. Packaging also evolved. Glass bottles were strong, reusable, and familiar. But they were heavy. They broke easily. They had to be collected, transported back to the dairy, washed, sterilized, and refilled. Paper cartons and plastic containers were lighter and cheaper. They required no return trip and took up less space in delivery trucks and refrigerators. The milkman's greatest advantages disappeared one by one. His speed mattered less because milk lasted longer. His doorstep service mattered less because families owned cars. His returnable bottles mattered less because disposable containers were more convenient. And the personal relationship he offered struggled to compete with lower supermarket prices. Routes began shrinking. A milkman who once served hundreds of homes might lose a few customers each week. One family moved away. Another began shopping at a new supermarket. Another decided delivery cost too much. Eventually, the route no longer paid for the truck, the fuel, or the workers' time. There was no dramatic announcement, no single morning when America agreed it no longer needed milkmen. The empty bottles simply stopped appearing. The familiar clinking vanished from the streets. And one morning, the truck did not return. That was the final paradox of the milkman's story. Pasteurization, refrigeration, sealed packaging, and reliable distribution had helped him make milk safe and trusted. But once that system became strong enough, families no longer needed him to complete it. The milkman had helped build a world that could live without him. Yet in a few places, the sound of bottles never disappeared completely. The milkman vanished from most American streets. But he never disappeared entirely. In Britain, the tradition survived longer in one of its most recognizable forms, the electric milk float. These small, quiet vehicles were perfectly designed for neighborhood delivery. They moved slowly, stopped constantly, and operated before dawn without waking entire streets. Long before electric cars became symbols of the future, milkmen were already using battery-powered vehicles to carry glass bottles from door to door. But even there, the routes gradually declined. Supermarkets expanded. Disposable packaging became cheaper. Families changed their shopping habits, and the milk float, once as ordinary as the mailbox, became a symbol of another age. Yet something unexpected has happened in recent years. In some communities, home milk delivery has begun to return. Not on the scale of the 1940s, and not for exactly the same reasons. The original milkman existed because fresh milk spoiled quickly and stores were difficult to reach. The modern version survives because some customers want something supermarkets cannot easily provide. Milk from a local dairy. Reusable glass bottles. Less disposable packaging. Regular delivery from someone they recognize. In this new system, the bottle returns to the dairy, where it is washed, refilled, and sent back into circulation, just as it was generations ago. What once seemed old-fashioned now appears surprisingly modern. The milkman has become part delivery worker, part local business ambassador, and part reminder that convenience does not always have to mean disposability. Return once more to the street from the beginning of our story. It is still dark. A vehicle stops beside the sidewalk. Someone carries a bottle toward the house and places it quietly on the doorstep. By morning, he will be gone. Inside that bottle is more than milk. It carries the history of unsafe cities, public health reform, glass factories, refrigerated kitchens, neighborhood trust, and a profession that helped change the way millions of families ate. The milkman did not disappear because people stopped needing milk. He disappeared because the world he helped build learned how to live without him. And wherever one last bottle waits beside a front door, a small part of that world is still alive.